Sarah was an ordinary woman, but her life had nothing ordinary about it. She was a single mom, and every morning in her small apartment felt like the start of a new battle. At 5 in the morning, when the streets were still quiet, Sarah's world came alive. Her little daughter, Emma, laughing, calling out, and making small messes, was the brightest part of her day. Yet, reality had never made life easy for her. Her days were packed: work, managing the house, taking care of Emma, and occasionally sneaking a few moments for herself. Every task tested her strength, but even in the chaos, a small flicker of hope lingered in her heart. Sarah knew life was tough, but the light of hope never fully went out. That day, Sarah decided to do something just for herself. Her friend had convinced her to go on a blind date. Sarah had always thought of love as a distant dream, something abstract and far away, but in the corner of her heart, a tiny wish remained: maybe there was someone out there who could bring not only happiness into her life but also into Emma's. It wasn't going to be easy. Reaching the date's location required effort, timing, and a little luck. Her car tire had blown out earlier that morning, and now the rain seemed to mock her attempts to get ready. As she rushed toward the meeting spot, she misstepped into a muddy puddle. In seconds, her outfit was covered in mud, and her carefully styled hair was soaked. "Okay," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath, "I'm doing this for Emma. Just one chance, then everything goes back to normal." She tried to brush off the mud, but it clung stubbornly to her dress. Her inner voice kept repeating, "It's just a date. One opportunity. Just show up and be yourself." Meanwhile, Edward, the CEO she was supposed to meet, successful, confident, and commanding, stepped out of his limousine. His presence radiated authority, and everything about him screamed perfection. But when his eyes fell on Sarah, muddy, wet, and flustered, a flicker of shock passed through him. He nearly took a step back, thinking he might walk away. Then, something made him pause. He saw Sarah's face, the fear, the embarrassment, but also the courage and self-confidence shining through. It struck him, maybe some things in life aren't meant to be judged by appearances. Sarah gave a small, brave smile. "I know I'm not perfect," she said softly, "but this is me, and there's my whole story in this moment." Edward, though taken aback, let go of his initial judgment. There was curiosity in his eyes now, mixed with a strange empathy. She walked toward the chair, each step accompanied by the rapid beat of her heart. What if he judges me? What if he's disappointed? She thought. But she reminded herself, this was just a meeting, a moment in life, and sometimes you have to take risks to see where life can take you. Finally, sitting across from him, Edward held his coffee cup and gave a small, awkward smile. "So, is this your first?" Sarah chuckled lightly, "Yes, and I hope it's not my last." Her voice carried confidence, with a hint of humor hiding underneath. Edward immediately realized this was no ordinary encounter. Sarah's personality was layered, resilient, and alive. The conversation began. Sarah talked about her day, Emma's little antics, and the tiny yet meaningful moments of life. Edward was struck by how she managed to remain optimistic and cheerful despite life's challenges. Every word carried sincerity, every laugh warmth, and every glance courage. This wasn't just a blind date, it was a lesson, a reminder that real humanity doesn't lie in perfection, but in the beautifully imperfect moments of life. Edward realized that he, too, often overlooked these small magical moments. As the initial awkwardness faded, Sarah blushed slightly and said, "Maybe we should talk a little more." Edward nodded gently. "Yeah. I think we might have gotten off on the wrong foot at first, but there's still time to make it right." And in that small moment, a door quietly opened, a new story waiting to unfold, one that could very well change both their lives. Sarah settled into the chair, still feeling the lingering chill from the rain and the discomfort of her muddy outfit. She tried to compose herself, brushing her wet hair out of her eyes and forcing a small smile. Across the table, Edward studied her carefully. His first impression had been a mix of surprise and judgment, but now there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, an interest he hadn't expected to feel. "So, you came through all of that, for this date?" Edward asked, his voice a mix of amusement and genuine intrigue. Sarah chuckled softly, a little embarrassed but mostly proud of herself. "Well, life doesn't wait for perfect timing, does it?" she said. "Sometimes, you just have to take the plunge, even if it's messy." She gestured lightly to her muddy dress. "Clearly, I'm great at that." Edward laughed, a short, low chuckle that made Sarah's heart flutter slightly. There was something unexpectedly human about this powerful CEO laughing at something so ordinary. It reminded her that behind the wealth, status, and power, he was just a person like her. They ordered coffee, and as the waitress walked away, Sarah felt a small wave of nervousness. "So, tell me, what made you agree to a blind date?" she asked, trying to turn the focus away from her own awkwardness. Edward raised an eyebrow, smirking slightly. "Curiosity, I suppose. And maybe a tiny hope that not everyone is as uptight as they appear in professional meetings." Sarah laughed, feeling her tension ease. "Well, you're in luck. I'm probably the least uptight person you'll meet today, even if I do come in half covered in mud." That sparked the first real connection between them. Conversation flowed naturally after that, shifting effortlessly from work and responsibilities to childhood memories, small joys, and tiny embarrassing stories. Sarah shared tales of Emma's playful antics, the time she had tried to cook breakfast and set off the smoke alarm, or when she had hidden in a closet pretending to be a superhero. Edward listened intently, occasionally laughing and sometimes shaking his head in disbelief. "You really have a way of seeing joy in the smallest things," Edward said, his tone almost reverent. "Most people would just complain or stress out." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "It's either laugh or cry, right? And I've learned laughing is better, most of the time." The conversation continued, and Edward began noticing the subtle strength in Sarah. She wasn't just a single mom juggling responsibilities, she was resilient, optimistic, and fiercely protective of her daughter. Her honesty was disarming, her humor charming, and her warmth impossible to ignore. At one point, a small mishap happened. Sarah's chair wobbled on the slightly uneven floor, and she nearly tipped over. Edward quickly reached out, steadying her with a gentle hand. "Careful," he said, his voice softer now, almost protective. "I think you've already survived enough today." Sarah smiled, a little embarrassed, a little flustered. "Thanks. I guess I do have a knack for accidents," she joked. But there was a flicker in her eyes, a spark that Edward noticed immediately, a mix of vulnerability and courage. For the next hour, the awkwardness melted completely. They shared stories of life's challenges and little victories, laughed over small mishaps, and discovered surprising common ground. Edward found himself drawn to her perspective on life, her ability to find hope even in difficult situations, her laughter that seemed to echo a life fully lived, and her quiet strength that didn't need to be announced to the world. Sarah, on the other hand, realized that Edward wasn't just a CEO, a man of power and status. Behind the suit, the calculated charm, and the public image, there was someone thoughtful, observant, and surprisingly empathetic. He noticed details most people overlooked, and he listened, not just with his ears but with his attention, his presence, and his quiet understanding. At one point, Edward leaned back and said, "You know, I wasn't expecting this, not today. But I'm glad I'm here." Sarah's heart skipped. "Me too," she admitted, her voice quiet but sincere. "I wasn't sure I'd make it, or that this would even be worth it. But sitting here, talking with you, I feel lighter. Somehow." Edward smiled, and in that smile, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. Both knew that this meeting, mud, awkwardness, nerves, and all, was special. There was a connection forming, fragile yet unmistakable, one that had the potential to grow into something meaningful. The waitress returned to refill their drinks, and Sarah noticed the subtle way Edward adjusted his posture, leaning slightly closer, showing engagement and interest. Their hands occasionally brushed over the table, sending small sparks neither could ignore. As the evening progressed, Edward suggested a short walk nearby, away from the crowded cafe. Sarah hesitated, looking down at her muddy shoes, but then she laughed softly. "Why not? Life's messy anyway. The walk was simple yet intimate. Puddles reflected the streetlights, and the rain had left a crisp freshness in the air. They shared small talk, funny anecdotes, and at times, comfortable silence. In those moments, words weren't necessary. Just being present, walking side by side, offered a rare sense of connection. By the time they returned, the awkward first impressions of minutes ago had completely dissolved. Edward no longer saw the mud, the wet hair, or the imperfect outfit. He saw Sarah, resilient, genuine, and alive. And Sarah no longer saw just a CEO or a stranger. She saw someone willing to look beyond appearances, someone open to understanding, and someone curious about her story. As they parted that evening, Edward said, "I think we should continue this conversation sometime. Maybe without the mud next time." Sarah laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Deal. And I promise I'll try to stay upright." Walking away, both felt a quiet thrill, the kind of anticipation that comes from the beginning of something unexpected, something real. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew this was a start. A story was unfolding, slowly but surely, one that neither of them would forget. The evening had taken on a comfortable rhythm. Sarah and Edward had left the cafe and were now strolling through the quiet streets nearby, where the rain had left a glistening shimmer on the pavement. The cool air mingled with the warmth of their laughter, and for a moment, both felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. Edward glanced at Sarah, noticing how her eyes seemed to reflect both mischief and determination. "You know," he said with a playful grin, "you really have a way of turning a disaster into, well, something memorable." Sarah laughed, the sound light and effortless. "I think life just has a way of keeping me humble," she replied. "And apparently, a way of muddying my outfits." She tapped her wet hair with a mock sigh. Edward chuckled. "I must admit, it's refreshing. Most people would have been embarrassed beyond words. You just own it." Sarah felt a warm flutter in her chest. Nobody had ever said that to her before, at least not with such genuine admiration. "I guess it's easier when you don't have the option to hide. I have a little person at home who needs me to be brave. So I kind of have to be." Edward's expression softened. He could sense the depth behind her words, the love for her daughter, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet pride she carried for managing it all. "Emma must be lucky to have you," he said quietly, almost as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. Sarah smiled but glanced away, a small blush coloring her cheeks. "She's my world. And she keeps me going, even when life gets chaotic." Their steps slowed as they reached a small park, still wet from the rain. The playground swings glistened, and the smell of fresh earth lingered in the air. Edward paused and gestured toward a bench. "Shall we sit for a moment?" Sarah nodded, and they settled down side by side. The air was charged with a comfortable silence, neither needing to fill it with words. Edward admired her posture, her expressive gestures, the way she seemed completely at ease despite the chaos of the day. Then, as if breaking the quiet, Sarah started recounting a story from earlier that week, how Emma had attempted to cook breakfast and ended up spilling syrup all over the kitchen floor. Edward laughed, genuinely and heartily, and Sarah joined in, the sound blending perfectly with the evening breeze. "You really laugh at life in a way I forgot existed," Edward said after a pause. "It's contagious." Sarah looked at him, eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and challenge. "Maybe you need a little more chaos in your life. It keeps you grounded." Edward raised an eyebrow. "I'll consider that. But I'm not sure I'm ready for a syrup-covered kitchen yet." They both laughed again, the shared humor creating a bridge between their worlds. The awkwardness from the cafe, the mud, the first impressions, all of it melted away in these simple moments. As they continued walking, Edward noticed how Sarah noticed the little details of their surroundings, the patterns of the puddles, the way the streetlights reflected on the wet asphalt, the smell of rain on soil. It was as if she experienced life fully, without rushing past it, without missing the magic hidden in the mundane. "Do you ever stop to think about how small moments shape us?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Edward looked at her, considering her words. "I do now," he admitted. Especially when I'm with someone who notices them like you do. A pause lingered, filled with unspoken acknowledgement. There was something powerful in the simplicity of this connection, a mutual understanding that this evening was different, meaningful, and rare. As they reached a quieter corner of the park, Sarah spotted a small puddle and playfully stepped in it, sending a splash toward Edward. "Oops," she exclaimed with a grin. Edward laughed and shook his head, shaking off the droplets. "I should have known better than to underestimate you," he said, smiling. They continued walking, now teasing and laughing, letting the conversation ebb and flow naturally. For every story Sarah shared about her life with Emma, Edward reciprocated with small anecdotes from his childhood, rare glimpses into the man behind the executive image. Through it all, Sarah realized something unexpected. Edward was not only attentive but genuinely curious. He asked questions, remembered small details, and responded with thoughtful reflections rather than empty flattery. It was new. And it was refreshing. Edward, in turn, noticed how Sarah's energy lit up the space around her. She had a resilience, a warmth, and a quiet humor that he hadn't anticipated. Every laugh, every spark in her eyes, was drawing him in, slowly but unmistakably. Eventually, they stopped near a small fountain, the water shimmering in the soft light. Sarah leaned slightly against the railing, her expression contemplative. "I didn't think tonight would be like this," she admitted. "I was nervous, worried I'd make a fool of myself. But it's been nice. Unexpectedly nice." Edward turned to her, his voice soft but sincere. "I feel the same way. Today, you surprised me. In the best way possible." Sarah's lips curved into a small smile. For a moment, the world around them seemed to pause, the sound of water, the distant city hum, the wet streets reflecting light, everything faded, leaving just the two of them in this fragile, quiet bubble. As they finally walked back toward the cafe to part ways, there was a new understanding between them. Edward no longer saw the mud, the wet hair, or the imperfections. He saw Sarah, alive, authentic, courageous. And Sarah no longer saw a distant CEO, only someone who had shown a willingness to look beyond appearances, to connect genuinely, and to listen fully. Standing at the cafe's doorstep, Edward hesitated, then smiled. "I hope we continue this conversation. Maybe next time without the mud." Sarah laughed softly, her eyes twinkling. "Deal. And I promise I'll try to stay upright." And with that, they parted, both carrying a quiet thrill, a small flutter of anticipation for what the future might hold. Something had begun tonight, small and fragile, but unmistakably real. And for both of them, it was a start worth remembering. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She couldn't stop replaying the evening in her mind, the laughter, the walks in the rain, and Edward's unexpected warmth. Every time Emma asked about her mom's day, Sarah found herself smiling, remembering small, perfect moments she wished could last forever. Meanwhile, Edward couldn't shake the memory of Sarah's presence. There was something about her energy, her laughter, her resilience that stayed with him long after their brief parting. He kept thinking about the way she noticed the little details in life, how her eyes lit up at simple joys, and how genuine she was even in the messiest of situations. A few days later, Edward called Sarah. His voice, steady yet slightly hesitant, carried a warmth that immediately put her at ease. "Hey. I was wondering if you'd like to meet again. Maybe somewhere less muddy this time," he said with a soft chuckle. Sarah laughed, feeling her heart lift. "I think I can manage that," she replied, teasing lightly. "No guarantees about my clumsiness, though." They agreed to meet at a small local park that evening. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks as the sun began to set, casting a gentle glow over the playground and walking paths. Sarah arrived, careful to avoid puddles this time, her dress clean and her hair styled with care. Yet there was still a nervous flutter in her chest. Edward was already there, leaning casually against a tree, hands in his pockets. When he saw her, his face broke into a warm smile. "You made it," he said, genuine relief in his voice. "I did," Sarah replied, matching his smile. "And I promise I didn't get lost in a puddle this time." They laughed together, and as they walked, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, and even silly little embarrassing moments that made them both laugh until their cheeks hurt. Edward shared rare glimpses of his life outside the office, quiet hobbies, past adventures, and moments of vulnerability he rarely revealed to anyone. For Sarah, it was fascinating. Here was a man who seemed untouchable, a CEO who commanded rooms and respect effortlessly, yet in these quiet moments, he was just human. Vulnerable, curious, and capable of feeling deeply. But then, as they reached a small bridge overlooking a pond, a subtle tension crept in. Edward's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face tightening slightly. "I have to respond to this real quick," he muttered, stepping a few feet away. Sarah felt a flicker of unease. She knew the demands of his job were high, but she couldn't help a small pang of disappointment. Is this what it's going to be like? Always interrupted? She wondered. Edward noticed her pause and returned immediately. "Hey, I'm sorry," he said sincerely, tucking the phone away. "You're right, I shouldn't let that distract me. It's important." Sarah smiled, reassured by his words, though a small tension lingered in the air. It was a reminder that their worlds were different, hers filled with small chaos and family needs, his with corporate demands and schedules. Yet, in that moment, they both acknowledged it without letting it overshadow their connection. They continued walking, now holding hands naturally, letting the evening's quiet intimacy deepen. Sarah felt a sense of safety she hadn't realized she'd been craving, a warmth that went beyond physical comfort. Edward, on the other hand, was captivated by how effortlessly Sarah made life feel vibrant, real, and meaningful, even amidst the ordinary. As they reached a small bench by the pond, Sarah turned to him. "You know, I wasn't sure this would work after the first meeting, the mud, the awkwardness." But now, she trailed off, searching for words. Edward tilted his head, waiting patiently. "But now," she continued, smiling softly, "I feel like maybe life isn't about perfection. Maybe it's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and still wants to be there." Edward's eyes softened. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sarah, that's exactly what I feel. You've shown me a side of life I forgot existed. And I want to explore it with you." A silence fell over them, not uncomfortable, but profound. In that quiet, the connection they had been building over awkward first impressions, playful moments, and laughter solidified into something deeper. Yet, just as the moment felt perfect, a small misunderstanding crept in. A text notification lit up Sarah's phone. It was from a coworker asking her to confirm a last-minute schedule change. She glanced at it briefly, frowning. Edward noticed the shift in her expression. "Is everything okay?" he asked gently. "Yeah, just work stuff," she said quickly, slipping the phone back into her bag. But Edward sensed her tension, and for a moment, a shadow of doubt appeared. "Does she have other priorities?" he wondered. He quickly pushed the thought aside. Tonight wasn't about work, or schedules, or interruptions. Tonight was about connection. And slowly, with shared laughter, soft touches, and meaningful glances, they managed to dissolve that small tension. By the time the sun had fully set, casting the world in gentle twilight, Sarah and Edward were walking back toward the park exit. Their hands remained intertwined, the playful teasing and laughter now replaced by a comfortable, intimate silence. Both knew they had crossed an invisible line, one where respect, admiration, and a budding romantic feeling had taken root. Standing at the edge of the park, Edward turned to Sarah. "Thank you for giving this a chance. For trusting it, and me," he said softly. Sarah's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I think it's worth it," she replied, her voice steady, yet filled with hope. And as they parted that evening, a quiet thrill lingered between them, a sense of possibility, a spark that neither could ignore. Something meaningful had begun, fragile yet undeniable, and both walked away knowing that this was just the start of a story neither of them would forget. A few days after their second meeting, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about Edward. His smile, the warmth in his eyes, the way he listened, it all lingered in her mind. But life, as always, refused to pause for a perfect moment. Work deadlines, Emma's school events, and household responsibilities kept her busy, leaving her with little time to breathe, let alone process her feelings. Edward, too, was grappling with his own busy schedule. Meetings, calls, and constant corporate pressures pulled him in multiple directions. Yet, between appointments and boardroom presentations, he found himself stealing moments to think about Sarah, the way she laughed, how she carried herself through life's chaos, and the simple authenticity she radiated. But then, as often happens, reality threw a curveball. Sarah had committed to a last-minute work assignment, a critical presentation she couldn't postpone. It coincided with a day she had planned to meet Edward. She agonized over the decision but ultimately informed Edward that she'd have to cancel. Edward's initial response was silent. He didn't reply immediately. When he finally did, his message was brief, "Okay. I understand." Sarah stared at her phone, feeling a pang of disappointment. She had hoped for understanding, yes, but the short reply felt distant, almost cold. She texted back quickly, "I really wanted to see you. I'm sorry. Can we reschedule?" Minutes passed, then an hour. No response. Her chest tightened, worry and doubt creeping in. Did he think I'm unreliable? She wondered. Did I ruin everything? Edward, meanwhile, had seen Sarah's message but was wrestling with his own feelings. He was hurt, not because she had to cancel, but because he hadn't realized just how deeply he had started caring. His pride and fear of vulnerability made him hesitant to reply with the depth of emotion he felt. By evening, both were consumed with thoughts about each other. The distance felt heavier than it was, amplified by unspoken words and unacknowledged emotions. For the first time, both Sarah and Edward experienced that strange, unsettling feeling of emotional tension, the kind that tests the patience of the heart and the courage of the soul. Finally, Sarah decided she couldn't wait any longer. She called Edward, her heart pounding with anxiety. After a few rings, he answered, his voice quieter than usual. "Hi," Sarah began softly, trying to mask her worry. "Hi," Edward replied, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings, doubts, and longing. I'm really sorry about today," Sarah said finally. "I didn't want to cancel, but I had no choice. I hope you understand." Edward sighed, a long, heavy sound that carried his own struggle. "I do understand. I didn't realize how much I was looking forward to seeing you. I guess I got upset." Sarah's chest loosened slightly. "Edward, it's okay. Really. I care about this too. I don't want work to come between us." There was a pause, then Edward spoke again, softer this time. "I know. I guess I just needed to hear it from you. I care about this, and you, more than I realized." Sarah felt her eyes prick with emotion. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I don't want to fight against life or schedules. I want to make time for us." Relief and tenderness began to replace the tension. The misunderstanding had opened a small crack, but now honesty and vulnerability were seeping through, making their connection even stronger. A few days later, they finally met again, choosing a quiet little park for a picnic. The sun was soft, casting golden light on the grass, and Sarah had prepared a small basket of snacks, while Edward brought a thermos of his favorite coffee. They laughed over the earlier misunderstanding, teasing each other gently about stubbornness and pride. Sarah admitted, "I should have called sooner to explain, but I panicked. I didn't want you to be disappointed." Edward smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And I should have trusted you instead of letting my pride get in the way. We both made mistakes. But that's okay, because we're here now." The afternoon stretched lazily. They shared stories, secrets, and quiet moments of connection. Edward watched Sarah as she laughed at a joke she had just made, and he felt a deep, unexpected tenderness swell in his chest. Sarah, meanwhile, noticed the way Edward's eyes softened when he looked at her, how his hand instinctively reached for hers during small moments. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, the misunderstanding that had loomed over them felt like a distant memory. They had navigated the rough waters, emerging with a stronger, more honest bond. As they packed up to leave, Edward turned to Sarah. "I'm glad we didn't let this slip away. You mean more than I thought possible." Sarah's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "And you mean more than I expected." They walked back together, hands intertwined, hearts lighter, and eyes full of possibility. The tension, the doubt, the misunderstanding, it had all led them here, to a place of mutual understanding and deepening connection. And in that quiet, tender evening, both realized that love, real, patient, and resilient, was beginning to bloom. The following week, Sarah and Edward had planned a special day together. After the earlier misunderstandings and emotional tension, both were eager to spend uninterrupted time, to truly enjoy each other's presence without distractions. The morning sun filtered through the windows as Sarah prepared breakfast for herself and Emma. Her heart fluttered with anticipation, thinking about the day ahead. Edward had invited them to a nearby botanical garden, a quiet, serene place full of colors, flowers, and winding paths. It was the kind of place that invited long conversations, laughter, and small gestures that mattered more than grand declarations. When Sarah arrived with Emma, Edward was already waiting, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the way. His smile lit up the space between them. "For you," he said gently, handing the flowers to Sarah. Sarah's eyes softened, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, they are beautiful." She glanced at Emma, who grinned and hugged Edward. It was a simple, heartwarming moment, one that instantly melted any lingering awkwardness or hesitation. As they walked through the garden, Edward and Sarah found themselves talking, laughing, and teasing each other in the easy, playful way that had developed over the past weeks. Emma ran ahead, pointing at butterflies and little ponds, while Sarah and Edward exchanged glances that spoke volumes without words. At one point, Edward took Sarah's hand as they paused by a pond reflecting the golden afternoon sunlight. "You know," he said softly, "I've realized something important these past few days. Life is better when you share it with someone who truly sees you." Sarah looked up at him, her heart skipping. "I feel the same. I've spent so long worrying about getting everything right, about surviving each day. But being with you, it feels like I can breathe a little easier, laugh a little louder, and just be myself." Edward smiled, his thumb brushing gently across her hand. "That's exactly it. I want to be part of that, with you, and with Emma too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of joy. She had never imagined that a blind date, a muddy outfit, and a series of chaotic days could lead to this, a moment of pure connection and possibility. "You mean that?" she whispered. "I do," Edward said sincerely. "More than I can put into words." Emma tugged on Sarah's other hand, laughing. "Mom, let's play by the fountain." The innocence and joy in her voice brought a smile to both adults. Edward knelt to play along, showing his playful side and forming a bond with Emma that Sarah had secretly hoped for. Hours passed in laughter, exploration, and quiet conversations. They shared small joys, tasting fresh fruits from a garden stand, watching koi fish swim in sparkling ponds, and pointing out the tiniest details in flowers and leaves. Every glance, every gentle touch, every shared smile strengthened the invisible thread between them. As evening approached, Edward and Sarah found a quiet bench overlooking a small lake. The sky was painted with hues of orange, pink, and violet, casting a magical glow over the water. Edward turned to Sarah, his voice low and earnest. "Sarah, I don't know what the future holds. But I do know this, I want to face it with you. I want to be there for you, for Emma, for all the messy, wonderful, chaotic moments life throws at us." Sarah's heart swelled. She reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. "I want that too," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I want to face it together, whatever comes." Edward smiled, leaning slightly closer. "Then, can we make this official? I mean, start something real, together. Sarah laughed softly, a mixture of joy and relief. Yes. We can start something real. As they embraced, the world around them seemed to pause, birds chirped softly, the water shimmered, and Emma clapped her small hands in delight. The chaos, the struggles, the misunderstandings, they all faded in the warmth of this perfect moment. The drive home was filled with laughter, shared stories, and plans for the future. Edward talked about weekend adventures, little surprises for Sarah and Emma, and ways to build memories together. Sarah shared her hopes for stability, love, and a family environment where Emma could grow happy and secure. By the time they reached Sarah's apartment, the sun had fully set, leaving a sky full of stars. Edward knelt down to Emma's height and said, "You have the coolest mom in the world. I hope we can all have a lot of fun together." Emma hugged him tightly. "Yes. You can come play anytime." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart full. She realized something profound: love doesn't come perfectly. It comes messy, unexpected, and sometimes in the most ordinary moments, like muddy outfits, missed calls, or rainy walks in the park. But when it comes, it transforms everything. Edward looked at Sarah and smiled. "Are you ready for the next adventure?" he asked softly. Sarah laughed, the sound ringing with hope and excitement. "With you?" "Always." And in that simple, heartfelt agreement, a new chapter began, a story of laughter, love, and connection that promised growth, joy, and endless possibilities. For Sarah, Edward, and little Emma, this was more than just a happy ending, it was a beginning.